or if it doesn't work the first time, that doesn't mean that you aren't capable, that this is something that you're bad at. It means none of that. Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today I thought I would offer a few of my own personal tips, tricks, and recommendations when it comes to spellcraft. I'm hoping this can serve as a bit of a primer for any beginners out there who are looking for a place to start. As well, this may serve as a refresher to some who are more proficient, advanced, or farther along in their practice. This is by no means a comprehensive list of tips and tricks. This is meant to be a bit more generalized and serve as a foundation. So I have some book recommendations along with some general ideas that I hold and think would have been wonderful to know in the starting of my practice in spellcraft. I guess I will start with the fact that I am not an authority figure on this, that you should not take anything I have to say as holy writ. Of course, take what resonates and leave the rest. In fact, I would advise you to be a bit suspicious or cautious with anybody who does claim to be an authority figure of any sort, to take those that you may look up to or hold in high esteem and really think about what it is that you're being told or learning from them. There is nobody out there who is a greater authority figure on you than you. So when it comes to spellcraft, of course, you want to ensure that you're the authority figure on your own practice. That's just my 2 cents. I'm not here to tell you what is right and what is wrong, what your morals ought to be. If something is unacceptable or acceptable, that's really for you to decide, and I'm urging you to be curious, to think critically, to be mindful and aware when approaching spellcraft. I think those are some of the greatest assets and abilities a practitioner of any sort can have. Spellcraft inherently implies, to some degree, I would say, the idea of magic. I don't think that this needs to entail a certain belief system. It doesn't need to be attached to a religion or a tradition or a culture. It can exist in a secular way. It can exist in a more scientific realm that's empirical. This can be agnostic or atheist. There are plenty of practitioners who don't like the idea of titles, who wouldn't even classify what they're doing as perhaps spellcraft or magic. And if you choose to use other identifiers or titles, that's completely fine as well. I found that this term is general enough that I think it's what I'd like to use in approaching this topic so that the right people find it. But do know that. I will say, though, that there are also a lot of practitioners out there who do identify with certain titles like witchcraft, or identifying as witches, magical practitioners, sorcerers, magicians, occultists. And so if you are embarking on a certain sect of spellcraft that is attached to a tradition, a faith, or a belief system, of course, do your research, understand what you're getting into. I think that holds true even if you are performing more secular or atheistic types of magic that aren't attached to a tradition, to understand the inner workings, the ins and outs, I should say, of what you're doing. Spellcraft is a practice. You wouldn't get on a bike without knowing what you're supposed to do when you get on it. Otherwise, you might fall over. There might be an element of confusion. So I would say to understand what it is that you want to do, what it is that you are doing before you do it. 2 books that I wish I had read at the very offset of my practice and my own personal eclectic path are The Elements of Spellcraft: 21 Keys to Successful Sorcery by Jason Miller. This is actually in part an inspiration for this video. I recently finished this book. It's been circulating around in this community, in the sort of spiritual community, for quite some time. It's held in high regard, and I think that there's a good reason for it. This is practical, it's general, so it's not tied to any one tradition. I think anybody who's looking to engage in spellcraft would benefit from reading this. It does account for the pitfalls, for the mindsets, for things to consider, especially when we are beginning and there's that element of zeal and excitement and whimsy that we bring to the magical practice. This is here to, I think, ground us a bit and ask us to account for certain elements so that we don't find ourselves in precarious situations that we would rather not be in. This is practical. It's going to give you instructions. It's going to tell you and guide you in a way that feels more holistic. It accounts for everything. And so I think you could do a lot worse than to start with a book like this. The other one that I have that's more, I would say, on the creative end of the spectrum would be Spellcrafting: Strengthen the Power of Your Craft by Creating and Casting Your Own Unique Spells by Erin Murphy Heiscock. This is more so for those looking to avoid, I would say, maybe the cookie cutter books on spellcraft out there. I will say that it's wonderful, the day and age that we live in, with the innumerable amount of resources we have at our disposal, both online and in hardbound text, and as well as the sorts of resources we can find in the form of other people out there. But I do think that we want to, well, the reason I'm suggesting these two books specifically is that they are general in a sense, that they are not super specific. They're great for beginners, they're beginner friendly, but I also think that the tenets that are put forth in these books are ones that would benefit somebody throughout their entire spellcraft practice, whether they are a beginner or a more proficient advanced practitioner, regardless of the walk of life you come from. I think that these books would steer you well in regards to maybe approaching spellcraft. This one in specific, like I said, is kind of for those who aren't as on board with those more cookbook type spellcraft books. While I do love the many cookbook style spellcraft books out there, and what I mean by that is really just books that detail a spell. They say, you can fall in love, this is what you have to do, you light the red candle, and they tell you the incantation that you're supposed to be reciting. Those books are great for inspiration, in my opinion, but I do think, like I said in the beginning, to do your research to understand why it is that you're doing what you're doing. If you don't know why you're using a red candle, if you don't know why rose quartz would be applicable, if you don't feel like that is right, and you also don't understand, of course, why you're doing it, then maybe it's not the right way to approach it. I think that adding an element of yourself in your practice can never hurt, and I think that walking the middle ground, which this book really speaks to quite a bit, is important. There's that sort of really free-flowing, eclectic side of things where anything and everything is up for grabs in terms of modification, and there doesn't even need to be a starting point or basis to create a spell, versus the more, I would say, rigid, tradition-oriented, dogmatic, instructional way of approaching spellcraft that follows very, very rigid and nuanced approaches to the way that one ought to cast certain spells, that doesn't account for any sort of modification, modernization, or personalization. I think that keeping both of those extremes in mind when approaching spellcraft and seeing where you fall in the spectrum is going to be important, but to maybe avoid either extreme, I think that applies for most areas of life. Avoiding extremism is a great way to walk through life, or at least to think critically before perhaps falling into any form of extremism. I have these tips here that I'm trying to reference, but kind of jumping all around. I would say one thing that I would wish I was told maybe right at the very start was to not be so discouraged if something doesn't work exactly how you imagined it, or if it doesn't work the first time. That doesn't mean that you aren't capable, that this is something that you're bad at. It means none of that. I do think, like any sort of skill set or any sort of practice, it does take a degree of practice, it does take a degree of trial and error, and perhaps it's just something that you need to revisit. It's something that you maybe needed to think through a little bit more. Maybe there was something that was unforeseen. I think experience and hindsight are important, so you're never going to progress or achieve success without trying, and a degree of failure is inevitable. So do expect that, especially in the beginning, and take those as learning experiences and stepping stones, as opposed to, I would say, discouraging elements that may keep you or prevent you or make you feel unqualified. I think you should proceed. I don't think you should be discouraged if something doesn't work the first time, or if it turns out differently than you expected. That's something to account for as well. In anything in life, when we're learning anything, I'm going to be the person that tells you to take notes, to record what you've gone through. I think that that's helpful. You can reflect on it, you can critically dissect it and pick it apart. For example, maybe you are 5 years along, but you want to revisit something you did at the beginning. It's hard to learn from things that have happened when we are addressing or referencing our memory alone. Memory is subjective, it shifts, it's fluid. We write something down in the moment, it's concrete in a physical way that we can reflect on, and we can know exactly what happened in that moment, versus, for example, trying to reference our memory about a spell or a practice we engaged in 3 years ago. Our memory is not necessarily the most reliable source. So write things down, keep a log. Regardless of failure or success, it's important, I think, to record what you've been doing, how you feel about it, the outcomes. All that's going to bode well for a very productive and fruitful practice in the future. So If you aren't one to keep notes, perhaps record it in a voice memo of some sort. You could also perhaps video or document your experiences in a less traditional way or something that works better for you. I know we're not all note takers by, inclination. So, but that would be my tip there. There's of course more than one way to do almost anything. Like I said in the beginning, I would say be a little bit discerning in the authority figures or resources that you are using and utilizing, and paying any sort of authority or homage to. I would say to really be curious, to dissect, to think critically, to reference multiple sources, to not take any one resource as your entire practice. I think that comes with anything. We want a full spectrum. I want you to cross-reference things for your own sake so you get a better understanding. That can't hurt. It can only help to have more information at your disposal. And of course, your views, your beliefs, your opinions may change, and that's natural. I don't think that that is hypocritical or contradictory. I think that that is a telltale sign of somebody who is evolving and coming into their own, somebody who is absorbing information and synthesizing it in a way that is helpful. So yes, of course, consult many resources. The world is your oyster. I think it would behoove you to take advantage of the resources at your disposal and to seek them out wisely. Understanding how something works for you and anticipating consequences and outcomes. That, of course, is important. We need to pay respect to anything that we're doing. If we treat a tool or a practice with flippancy or disrespect, how can we expect something to come out of it that's going to benefit us? This is really like an investment, like all things in life. If you pay a lot of mind to maybe your education or to something that you want to happen, and you are mindful about it and you are methodical, there's a good chance that what comes out of it is going to be helpful. It's going to reflect what you've put into it. The same of Spellcraft. So understand that if you're approaching it in a very casual way, your results may be casual. Again, these are general life things, ideas to keep in mind. I think that these apply for more than just Spellcraft, but we do want to think about them in terms of Spellcraft when you are practicing in any sort of way. That being said, I guess that's about all I have to say as far as a starting point. I don't want to venture into anything that's too specific, that's too catered. I really think that having a foundation to work from for yourself and to make those decisions for yourself is important. Agency, freedom, autonomy are things that I value above all else in Spellcraft as well as other areas of life. I hope you are all well. Like and subscribe if this was fun or interesting. Feel free to leave questions down below. I'd love to make more videos of this sort, perhaps on more specific things in regards to Spellcraft, spirituality, and tarot. I have made videos on some of these more specific topics before, but I thought that this was something I felt compelled to speak about. So that's that. Until next time, bye.